Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, "Who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me?" Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Lukes here at the Crossroads. Another interesting day and an evolution, if you like, of our discussion. Welcome, Betty Lukes from Adelaide.
Thank you, Arnie. Good morning.
And Wallace Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi there. We're having some fairly nice weather. It's a little bit of rain, but not too much. Some nice temperatures in the upper and lower 20s. It's quite pleasant here, actually.
Okay, thanks for that, Wally. We're in the mid teens. We are mid teens. A little bit of rain in Adelaide, which is welcome. It's been not a heavy rains over this winter, just steady. All right, I want to bring some articles up. The first article is in regard to, and that's those young Thai boys, where they've been safely recovered from the cave, and their instructor. And I thought, what a beautiful result of people working together in community, and so I think that to me exemplifies the spirit, pursuing a goal, working together, only one objective, and I might add that the methodology that these rescuers used was top down hierarchical, and that is that they had a director, and he was in charge, and everyone else was subservient to his authority in order to achieve the goal, which was to recover the children and their coach safely, and then extract all the rescuers safely from the cave, which they achieved. Now, I also want to bring up some other articles while we're here on the website, and this is in regard to a town in Mexico. Now, as you know, Mexico is really suffering because of its drug wars and the gun wars and the low value of life. And here it is, a small town of 20,000 has decided that they're going to take charge themselves and to sort things out. And the first thing that they insist on is security, securing their borders, and then adherence to law, lawful behaviour by everyone in there. And I think that to me is fascinating. It's showing you that in association, if you understand the key objectives, you're able to achieve what you desire. Now, I'll highlight another article here, and this is in regard to the South African Afrikaners who are in their thousands wanting to go and live in Russia because their association in South Africa is not working. They're not achieving sufficient results, satisfactory results to achieve what they want. So their association is actually, they're acknowledging it's a failure. And this, of course, was a time when South Africa, there was a time when South Africa was, along with Rhodesia, was the jewel in the eye of all of Africa. What wonderful countries, and essentially the pilgrimage of the black Africans was heading south to live there in order to achieve the good life. And I find that fascinating. It's certainly different from what it is today. It's a completely different country. And now they're leaving, or they're attempting to leave in their droves. So in association, it's failing. So here we saw the ties and the extraction of those boys, and we were, if you like, the world was sitting in their armchairs watching and praying and hoping for them. And we saw faces, and we were associated with them personally, because we could see their smiling young faces, happy and vibrant. And in the same week, there was a boat that overturned in Thailand, and there were 44 people drowned. And you don't have the same association because you can't make the eye contact. You can't actually put a face to a name. And so this is just the way things are. It's the way it is. Now we come to the Association of the South Africans and wishing to go and live in Russia. And at the moment, Russia is giving away land. I think I highlighted that in the previous program. So to me, association is very important. We're evolving from the individual into association. The right to choose one thing at a time. Choose or refuse one thing at a time. And also, in association, if you don't like the results, you can opt out. And that is what we're seeing with the South Africans. Betty Lukes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arnie. Well, yes, there are so many instances, so many examples that we can look at and begin to think more deeply about what is happening and what we're doing and where our own nation will end up. And we are dealing with humans in association, and it was Jeffrey Dobbs who reminded me that it is the outcome in practice of thinking which carries the consequences of both life and death. And he also emphasized the importance of thinking in Trinitarian terms. And well, of course, in my understanding, and we are a Christian-based movement, and I emphasize that word, movement. We're not an organization, we're a movement. And if you take the word association, you can actually see that it is implying that we're talking about a society, and humans in association become a society. Now, this civilization had a prototype, an original model to work in harmony with, to copy, and over time it built up its own version based on the original prototype. And what do you think was the prototype? It was based on the Christian understanding, and of course the prototype was the God is a Trinity and God is a society. I use that word very carefully because how dare I speak about God that way, but as I understand it, the Athanasian points out that God is a society in a sense of a group of persons, and we're neither to confound the persons nor divide the substance. And the tripartite system of governments was built up as a result of seeing the prototype or having a vision of the prototype. And human society is primarily metaphysical. Its roots are in thoughts, not things. That's important. Its roots are in thoughts, not things. And social credit holds that society must have regard for the organic relationships of its prototype. We've got to have a look and see how does it work. What is the original model that we're to look at? And all that I have learned and understood comes as a result of understanding the importance of that. Credit is another word for faith or confidence. So when we talk about social credit, we talk about the social faith or the social confidence, and that's what binds any social group together. It's the mutual trust or belief in each other. And I think that Arnie was pointing that out with the wonderful results of what happened in Thailand, that the group worked together, they had mutual trust or belief in each other to do that which would bring those boys back safely.
Thank you, Betty. Wally Klinck.
Well, that's right. You had a lot of widespread interest and sympathy around the world, and you had offers of assistance from various quarters. But eventually a team got together, and as you're quite right, Arnie, they operated under the direction of someone who knew what to do, and apparently they were very well organized and they achieved their end. That doesn't mean they'll spend the rest of their life taking orders from the person who was directing them for this particular and specific task. And that's the way life should be. We should group and regroup freely in order to achieve ends which are desired under different conditions and at different times. We should be free to do that. And that's, Douglas was, we know him for his outstanding work with regard to monetary matters. But behind all of that really was his attitude toward human beings as human beings, and what freedom they have in order to live their lives in a way that is meaningful to them. And of course that all brings in the whole question of association, because association is, as Douglas recognized, the basis of achievements which go far beyond anything that any individual acting alone can achieve. So we have to have cooperation, and we have to have freedom of association. And that's why any society that is based on a static concept, on a basis of administration from the top down, denies that type of freedom to associate for a desired purpose. The purpose comes from above, and the individual doesn't have too much choice as to what it is, and that simply doesn't serve the needs of life in any kind of a full sense at all. In fact, it leads directly to tyranny when it comes to its logical conclusion. There is no need for centralized control over everything. Certainly, you don't have to have. Life is composed of different actions, goals, and so on, and they don't necessarily all have to be tied together. Things can happen independently, and they should do that for people to gain the greatest satisfaction. But when you get into a highly bureaucratic administered state, that's the situation you get into. Freedom is violated, and it's just not satisfactory at all. There is another way, and social credit certainly does provide a very unique but very realistic approach to the problem.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's beautifully put. I was over my working career, I've been many things. One was a subcontract carpenter, and in the process of working for various builders, we were given a contract to achieve a target, whether it was do the frames or the roof on a house or some other task. And the contract was for a limited period. We were agreed on a price, a payment, and so we went after that goal, and we did it as efficiently and as adhering to the code as we were capable of doing with our understanding. And of course, the buildings are still there today, so what we did worked well. But the point is that it was we came together for that task, and that to me demonstrates that an agreement. He's the boss. Let him be the boss. If he's not happy with my workmanship, then adhere to what he wants until such time as you're over the line. He's satisfied that what you've done is of the standard, and you take it on the chin. He doesn't like what you've done. That's fine. Fix it. Satisfy him. He's in charge. And to me, that free association, choosing or refusing one thing at a time, is very, very important. Now, when we move to the area of state, you can't choose or refuse unless you're doing what the Afrikanis are doing, and that is that they're moving halfway around the world, totally different climate, in order to have a say in what their end result is. That to me is if you like, it's an indictment that the system is not working for them. Betty Lukes.
Well, speaking of the Afrikaners, I'm reminded that it was the white Boers who built up the nation, and I'm thinking of a video I watched just recently, and you've got this female from the ANC, the ruling party in South Africa at the moment, and she's saying, oh, well, the black people have been very patient, and we want our land back. They didn't build up the land. It was only when the whites built up the land that the blacks migrated from the north to the south. And on that video, there were also these farming folk interviewed who had a murder on their farm as a result of this black and white conflict. And you look at them and you see weather-beaten, hard-working people, and this ANC lady had a beautifully groomed, nail polish, make up the lot, and she didn't look as though she'd done a hard day's work in all her life. I don't know whether people are realizing what's happening there, and it's not a matter of that they are entitled to the land. They didn't develop the land, but I understand that they've tried to work out ways that both could live together, but it's not going to work. And I certainly can understand why the white South Africans want to go to Russia.
Thank you for that, Betty. Yes, that's exactly right. They're not getting what they want. Wally.
It's a breakdown in the in association. You're right, Arnie. They're simply not getting what they had hoped for and what they want and what they quite realistically and properly do hope for. It's a question of, well, the problem with South Africa was, again, it was an imported uh, rebellion, revolution, or whatever you want to call it, because the ideas came from the West and from revolutionary sources in the West, and it was prosecuted, guided by people of the communist persuasion. And they infected the Africans with the idea that they had been unjustly treated and robbed and so on and so forth. And we know that in the past things weren't always perfect. But believe me, I don't think they have gained anything by throwing the source of development and progress out of their region, because it's obvious that the situation has deteriorated very badly, not only for whites, but for blacks as well. And so it's based on a completely misconception of what actually happened. As Betty said, the land had not even been occupied until the British and the Dutch moved in there. And as she said, they became really model countries in many ways, Rhodesia as well. So it's a question of wrong principles of association being introduced and instilling resentment and hatred and promoting policies which are even less desirable and actually damaging to the results that they should be able to get from their association. Tragedy, actually, a tragedy.
Okay, thanks for that, Wally. I'm just going to reorientate this discussion because I know we're touching on, or heavily touching on, South Africa, and also highlighting the hope that the Afrikaners have got in Russia, going to Russia for not necessarily the good life, but at least the better life. And I know the if you like, the romantic history of America was freedom of religion. That's why that's supposedly why the whole evolution of people going there and establishing it as a nation. Now, Australia established as a nation, and more than 100 years ago, we debated for a period of at least 10 years of how we were going to associate, and from that association and agreement, the Constitution was evolved, formed, and agreed to, and that being the principal document of our land. Now, if you like, our nation, as is Canada, as is America, as is England. We're seeing the chaos in England at the moment with the EU and all the stuff that's going on there. We are all in disarray. We are all in disarray. Our parliaments are in disarray. Our political systems are in disarray. And the thing is that we are all not getting what we want from our association. There's not an increase in liberty. There's certainly not an increase in material security. There's certainly not an increase in security. If you consider what's going on in the likes of these grooming gangs in Britain, or the western suburbs, eastern western suburbs in Melbourne, or the western suburbs in Sydney, I mean, there's violence everywhere. It's in the streets, and the fact is people do not feel secure. Now, I'm going to bring it back to Betty, because Betty's got an interesting story she talked about before, about Alfred and what it was like with the Danes, and then Alfred. Betty.
Thank you, Arnie. Well, thinking about humans in association, and after all, we are social beings, if you think about it. We're not individuals just one individual on an island. We are social beings, and it's only through the coming together in a society that we gain the increment of association. But I was reminded of what happened in English history, and I likened it, of course, to what was happening with the Mexico town, and how the people wanted to clean their city up of all the corruption and the thuggery, all of that. And it reminded me of that the history reveals that when the pagan Danes ruled in parts of England, rape, murder and robbery were commonplace. When Alfred the Great, he was known as Alfred the Great, the Christian king, ruled Wessex, he claimed any child or woman could walk the length and breadth of his kingdom in peace and safety. His was a Christian kingdom. And on the island of Iona, that's off the coast of Scotland, and I visited there, there is this abbey. There's the remains of a larger abbey, but there's a Christian community there. And it was set up by St. Columba and his fellow missionaries, and they developed a community there, and they had to grow their own vegetables. They had to be a self-supporting community. And this was in a roughly 450, 500 AD. And of course they did develop it. And what happened, they didn't have the security, and it was the Vikings who would come and rob them of their food and their whatever wealth they had that the Vikings could take. And eventually that community abandoned that spot about 300 years later because they didn't have the safeguard to look after them. And that to me is something that I see that the Mexicans are doing. They have their own voluntary security guards so that they live in peace and security, and that is important. But what is important is that the social credit that we talk about, the social faith, it's a result, it's a fruit, or a practical expression of real Christianity in society, one of its most recognizable fruits. There are commonplace examples we take for granted every day of our lives, and I've just listed some of them. There's trust between neighbor and neighbor, and the faith we can use, we have faith that we can use the roads, trusting all will obey the road rules. And look what happens when they're not obeyed. We have belief that home gardens will be respected and the produce safe from theft. And what of farmers' crops or orchardists' fruit? How can any economic activity go forward if we couldn't rely on honesty and fair dealing? And do we not see how vital practical consequences are involved in, we were told, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? And that's an important rule of life.
Thank you, Betty. I'll pass it over to Wally. Wally.
Well, that's a profound, probably the most profound guide to life that you can imagine, because it really, if you think about it, if you operate on that basis of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, you can hardly go wrong, can you? But unfortunately, we were witnessing a breakdown of association, a violation of the sound rules of association, which normally would be expected to give good results. And that's what's happening in the financial system, is the primary technical cause of that, although it is stimulated or motivated by a metaphysical position, a certain philosophy that overlies it. But what it does is it robs the individual of the economic security which we're entirely capable of providing, and puts everybody into a position of dependency upon somebody else. In other words, authority wielded by someone else on a great giant pyramid of power which reaches its top at the financial system itself and those who administer it for their particular purposes. In other words, it is an exercise of the will of power over your fellow man. And that is an illegitimate desire for relating to your fellow man. You should not want to exercise control over him. You should want to cooperate with him in association, freely contracted, in order to get the results you want, and in that way being most able to get the results that you're looking for.
Thank you, Wally. That's beautifully put. That's right. That in any association, we're after a result, and whether that's a cricket team, sporting, or it's an art group, or it's a school, you're after a result. You're after an opportunity to be educated. That's what it's about. To be enlightened, and it's always for mutual benefit. That all those participating in it are after a result. And when they don't achieve that result, when we're looking at the breakdown of society, we're seeing it everywhere. We're not actually achieving our results. And so we've got to come back to ask the question, why are we here? And what is the purpose of this association? And in our case, it's Australia. What is the purpose of Australia? The purpose of Australia, our constitution. The first is security. It has to be. I mean, Mexico, that city in Mexico is demonstrating it. Secure borders. We've got to be able to sleep at night and not have to sleep with a gun under our pillow. That's the first thing. The second thing is the upholding of the law. And that law, our history, our culture of law, is that it's an evolution of law based on right thinking. It's not arbitrary, and it's not one law for you and another law for the bureaucrat. It's the same law for the bureaucrat, the fascist in charge. And we're seeing our society break down because we've got, if you like, people who consider themselves above the law. And the biggest question mark I see above the law is the bureaucratic or the political class, the elites. They see themselves as above the law. This business of naturalisation, this business of citizenship. I mean, we've seen 16 senators in Australia lose their seats and have to restand. And I find that fascinating it's an indictment of the contempt that the political class has towards the rules, our constitution. Betty Lukes.
Arnie, it was mentioned before that the importance of thinking in Trinitarian terms and understanding that what we're looking for is an organic approach to life. And Owen Barfield, in his book Romanticism Comes of Age, he actually refers, and this particular article was written in the 1930s, and he's referring, certainly I'd say, to C.H. Douglas's proposals, and he was talking about the rate and the rate of flow, but he wasn't limiting it to just that. But the thing that he was referring to, of course, was this organic approach. And he spoke of it in this way. Of course, we understand it as social creditors that when we're dealing with economics, we're dealing with the costs, prices, and purchasing power. Again, a trinity. But he spoke about a flow of something which proceeds from one stage to another, from one phase to phase, without loss or friction. The point is that that which flows is one thing, and yet at the same time it is three things. And I thought of this in thinking about relationships, human relationships. And of course you've got that with mother, father and child. And my word, didn't we see that demonstrated when the parents were photographed at knowing that their children had been saved from that cave. You saw the importance of the Trinitarian relationship with mother, father and child. We see it, what it was meant to be with our Trinitarian governments and the division and separation of powers. and not like what ended up with the Roman civilization, of course, which was the pyramidal structure, and it broke down. Of course it broke down because it's going against the very nature of things. It's going against the nature of human beings. And I think these things are just so important to not just to think casually about, but to consider, to really consider and think about. And that's how I see the situation.
Thank you, Betty. That's excellent. I'm just looking at the time. It's just on the half hour, and I'm going to call for closing comments. But you've touched on a profound truth there, and that is that and I was going to bring it up in later forums, but I'll bring it up now, and that is that the engagement the individual has in association with with their representatives, with their bureaucrats, with their, if you like, the governing class, their engagement isn't a one-day event. It isn't static. It's dynamic, and it needs to flow. And that I find it fascinating. You can't have 2 minutes in a ballot box and that's your only engagement. That's static. 2 minutes in a ballot box won't cut the mustard. What you've got to do is you've got to be on the phone, you've got to be sending the emails, you've got to see them face to face. You've got to look at their eyes and see if they're telling you what they're telling you, or they're talking with a forked tongue. You've got to look at them and weigh them up as human beings. Because the fact is that the political class, what we're seeing is a breakdown of civilization, and it starts there. It starts by people who are not actually being held to account, and are held to account on an ongoing basis. Not get over the line on election day, but an ongoing basis. That's what this is about. This democracy that we're talking about, this freedom to associate, is dynamic. It's not static. Closing comments, Wally.
Well, that's right, Arnie. Life itself is dynamic, and if you try to make it otherwise, you're going to cause no end of trouble. I think you have to understand that any kind of action derives from initiative. An initiative can only come from some individual. It doesn't stem from some abstract group. Somebody has an idea. Somebody has an objective, a goal. And if you have a situation where people can obtain the credit on the basis of the perceived validity of their proposal from the rest of the community, in other words, you need things to produce, so you borrow in order to credit in order to obtain these things from the community, and you produce, and you create goods and services, and you create costs and prices. And so far, we're all right. But at this point, we break down because it's in distribution and consumption that the problem develops. We don't provide enough effective buying power to the consumer, the end for whom everything is produced, really, to obtain what's being produced. And so we therefore have to either not produce, which of course we can't do, or resort on an endlessly growing mortgage on the future, drawing on that in order to allow us to enjoy the fruits of our current efforts. But the thing of it is, this creates all sorts of insecurity and poverty and all of that sort of thing. And of course, that is what the bureaucracy feeds on. It feeds on problems. If there were no problems in society, the bureaucracy would have much less reason to exist. It would have less reason or ability to inflict itself upon people's freedoms. And on that basis, you would have a reversion to the use more of individual creative initiative, because it's only through that things happen. That's only how you build a civilization. It's a civilization in terms of culture, economic-wise, or just the arts and so on, religion, philosophy. It's if you try to plan that off from the top, you can just imagine, if you think about it, how completely inadequate, how stripped of abundance and meaning the whole thing is bound to have, because you're relying on just the opinions of only a very few people as to what should happen in the world. That's not what life is all about. Life is something that's supposed to effloresce. It's supposed to simply be something that grows and prospers and and generally, increases. It's just, you cannot do things through central planning. So you have to be able to make arrangements with other people within the community to get the resources to produce. But when you do produce, you have to have a mechanism for the community of consumers to enjoy the results of what you produced. And no producer is going to be able to simply pile up a mountain of inventory. Producers can produce far more than producers can consume. There has to be a way of getting those products to the public. And now the dividend, the social credit consumer dividend and the compensated price to lower prices are the mechanisms that Douglas recommended, and I think I've never seen anything more appropriate. They're relatively simple, they're very easy to implement, and they certainly would achieve something in the way of increased consumption to the degree to which consumption was desired without creating inflation. In fact, it would combat inflation, prices would fall. And so you see that we would have a totally different, we wouldn't necessarily have to be busy, busy, busy all the time. We would be able to produce what we want and then take a rest and reserve some time for that rest and for enriching ourselves in a cultural sense.
Thank you, Wally. Beautifully, beautifully put. Betty Lukes, closing comments.
Well, Arnie, I think that we had a dramatic example of the church, the state, and the people working together through their representatives of all those folk who were involved in saving those boys in Thailand. And I can't think of any better example than that for people to look and to think about and to understand. They had one goal, and that was for the benefit of those boys. And that's what the church and the state and the people should be working towards when it comes to the people of Australia.
Beautifully put. Thank you for that, Betty. That's right. There's an opportunity for improvement, but it starts with the individual. It does start with the individual. So yes, you can point the bone and you can say the political class, the clergy, whatever, the bureaucrats, whatever. But in the end, it's the individual. It's one person at a time, choosing or refusing to do the right thing. Only do to them what you'd have them do to you. Beautiful. Arnie Lukes at the Crossroads. Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me?